this is Brian O'Haron, and this is the 9th program in the series, Planning for Success. Today's program is dedicated to my grandfather, Carmelo Russo. He was born in Syracuse, Italy, and became an apprentice barber at the age of 7. In about 1910, he moved to Conspicua, Malta, where he married my grandmother, and my mother was born. My grandfather came to America in steerage alone, and took up the barber's trade in Torrington, Connecticut. He never saw his parents again. He saved his hard-earned money for 2 years to enable my mother and grandmother to join him in America. He had 8 children in all, 5 that lived, and the children used to split an orange during the Depression. During the Second World War, people called him a greenhorn and threw garbage on his lawn. But he never gave up. He saved his money and provided well for his family, and before he died, he had quite an amount of savings. He was a very professional businessman who looked and acted like a banker. He never talked religion, politics, or controversial subjects to his customers. His customers always came first. He would never close the barbershop on a Saturday because that was his big revenue day, and he didn't want to lose the customers. He never took a holiday. He didn't take a holiday because he was afraid the customers may go somewhere else and then not come back. All of his daughters, my aunts, were married on a Monday because he didn't want to close the barbershop on a Saturday. When I was a child, I never knew it was a Monday because it was a very festive occasion, and I thought it was Saturday. If one of his customers was ill, he would walk to their home, he never owned a car, and he would give them a free haircut. If one of his customers was ill in the hospital, he would walk to the Charlotte Hungerford Hospital and give them a haircut. When they passed away, he would walk to the funeral home and give them their last haircut. As he grew older and retired, he lived to be about 85, he would walk to his old customers' homes and give them haircuts over the years. When I was in university, I think it was my sophomore year, I received a check from my mother for $250. And I asked her, "What was this money? Where did it come from?" She said, "It came from your grandfather. When you were born," I was the first grandchild in the family, "when you were born, he bought an insurance policy and he saved nickels, dimes, and quarters over the years by paying the premiums, and the total amount now is $250. He never mentioned this to me till the day he died, although I did thank him for it. I learned customer satisfaction from my grandfather, and I practiced the art all of my working career. I have been Mr. Customer Satisfaction for 2 major computer companies over the years. In memory of my grandfather, I will now play a few bars of an old Sicilian air that is now the basis for the song Home Sweet Home. Thank you, grandfather. Well, if you don't think that was an emotional experience, try it sometime. Very difficult for me to get through that, and it's very emotional even now. I have a cold, pretty bad cold, but as I learned from my friends in Hollywood and New York, show must go on. So I'm here to try to get through the next hour, despite the cold. I've got a few medications here, and I've got a glass of water, and I think I might be able to make it. I will start again, as usual, with the agenda, and I'll talk about a few comments. Then I'll have the financial update, a major project status board that I created now that the election's over, a major decision status board that I created now that the election's over, and we'll keep up to date from week to week, and a quick review of planning for success to date for those especially who haven't watched it in the past, a quick review of creating an organization for success, a quick review of creating an environment for success part 1, and then finally, after these last 3 or 4 weeks, we'll get to creating an environment for success part 2, and then next week we'll talk a bit about expediting the solution. Now I'll make some comments, and then we'll move on from there. The bond package, as promised, well, actually, this isn't what I wanted to do next. What I wanted to do next was the comments. So let me see if I can find the comment. Okay. The comments are Veterans Day tribute to William R. McGrain, my great-great-grandfather. My great-grandfather will be a picture up on the board today of his 50th wedding anniversary. He was an Orangeman from Armagh and Carney Almagh in Ireland. I had orange hats on, although you won't be able to see the hats. They had oranges in their hands. They were Orangemen. And my great-grandfather's in there, my grandfather's in there, my father's in there as a child, probably 4 or 5 years old. My cousins and my father's cousins and my grandmother's in there and all kinds of people. Right off to my, facing me, off to my right shoulder there is my grandfather with his orange hat on and mustache. He's the guy that came over from Ireland and volunteered for the Civil War and was a combatant soldier there. So I thank him for that and all the rest of the veterans who've been in combat over the years. Yesterday was Veterans Day, so thanks for that. Next thank you is for getting us off to all the citizens of the town who voted, for getting us off to a fine start by electing 5 very seasoned businessmen to manage our town for the next 2 years. We have turned the triangle around. Hopefully now we begin to travel down the triangle instead of up the triangle. We have been received well, and we are off to a great professional start. I'd like to thank all the candidates, all the people who helped the candidates, particularly Heather Capabianca and her husband, David, for putting in so much time and helping these Republicans to get into office. There's a special thanks also to the Taxpayers Association and the Independent Party and the unaffiliated candidate for their endorsement and support of some of these candidates. And I would also like to thank the many members of the Democratic Party that expressed encouragement and support, and those that voted for the candidates that won the election from both parties. Today begins my personal campaign to convince you to bring us 7 very seasoned businessmen in the '09 election. That campaign starts today. I'll show you how I'm going to approach that. Next week, I will be having my program switched to 9 o'clock on Tuesday evenings, and they will continue until further notice at that time. 9 p.m. on Tuesday evenings from 9 to 10. Planning for success. I will continue to help the selectmen as much as practical by gathering statistics, helping to draft objectives, helping to create progress reports whenever I can be of help. I will also continue to give status to the taxpayers and the residents of the town on the financial news and also on the progress of these elected officials. That way next year, or in 2 years, we'll be able to tell right away who we want to vote for, hopefully. Because this program is so well received, I have arranged for the better time slot. People are dropping some of these shows that were on before the election, so some time slots are available. I must say, though, that when I first got the 5 to 6 on Monday, I was a little skeptical about it, but we've had a real good reception and response from the community, and I'm tickled pink with that. So it all turned out for the better in the end, and as long as I feel I can contribute, I will continue. Now for the financial news, if we can switch now to the slide. The first thing I want to talk about is the bond package, and that's as promised, the majority of selectmen have canceled the public meeting and referendum dates for the new bond package. They will now concentrate on a new proposal more in line with their campaign promises, at least the majority of 5. I tend to deal with news here that's already in the public domain. I have no inside information, so I can't tell you what's going to happen here on that. But if you watch Jay Case's show on Thursday evenings, then you might get into some information there. Or if there's any other shows on during the week by the Democrats or anybody else, maybe you'll get some information there. But anyway, and then next Monday or next week when I'm on it on Tuesday evening, then I'll probably have better information for you on how they intend to proceed. I know that they're going to try to look at the most critical needs first, especially the ADA and OSHA considerations for Pearson School. The voting was 5 in favor and 1 against and 1 in abstention. Over the year or two, if I'm still here to do it in that time, I will keep a track of how many unanimous votes we have and who abstains and who votes no and who votes yes on what issues, and I'll probably every quarter I'll produce a status report which I'll show on this program. The revaluation results, property revaluation results, are due early December, so that's the next financial impact we will see. And I'm glad that'll be in December, because then we'll know before we vote on any bonding for any of the other issues. Now here's the first major status report. Red means it's done, and blue means it's in process. And as they get upgraded, I will put red on there when they're complete, and when new ones get started, I will put blue on. There's probably more started than I know here, but until the information is out in the public, I can't really deal with it. So the first thing that happened, a major step forward for the town, and you should be very, very proud of yourself for voting this way. You've elected 5 major businessmen as selectmen. Now we also have Candy Perez, who is an educator, and we have Mike Renzullo, who is yet undetermined as far as I'm concerned. The jury's out there, but I talked to 1 or 2 of his relatives who say he does have some business experience. He's built a few homes, and he's trying to either has them sold or is selling them, and got back recently from university in Colorado. So I have hopes for him, and I did drop off at his father's office today a list of my problems in Winsted and my proposed alternative, which is the objectives that I talked about on this show. It's the paper I produced on the possible objectives for success. Number 2, establish and publish high-level business priorities. I know that's in the works, and that should be published pretty quick. We talked about that on the show before, so they will agree and produce 5 high-level business priorities. And then these are the other commitments that they made during the campaign, as far as I know, and these are mainly on this page the organizational type commitments that they made. There may be more. If some pop up, I'll put them on here, but we're going to keep track of them, and we're going to watch progress as we go along to see exactly what they do. And they said they would delegate authority. They're going to try to change the charter to make it more easy to run as a business. They're going to try to produce the 5-year financial plan objectives and a 5-year financial plan, and they're going to review and make decisions necessary on a quarterly basis. Now, that was committed to before the election, so there are no details there yet. There are no time frames, but we will keep an eye on it. And let me just again once say that even if they don't change the charter and they don't do everything the way I'm saying, this is Brian's view of how a business should be run. Maybe not necessarily everybody else's, but that won't be the end of the world. It'll really slow the process down. It'll make it very difficult to get anything done, and it won't help us in the long run. But we still got to plod along and try to make everything happen. So we'll do that. Now, I want to say once again that when I talked about changing the charter, I thought it was very important to take and have the selectmen in instead of for 2 years, for 4 years, so they would have time to do the job. It's going to take us quite a few years to get out of the pickle we're in, and it isn't going to be done overnight. So we need these people to stay in. So as a backup plan, just in case the charter doesn't get changed the way I would like to see it get changed, because a lot of people tell me they probably won't make it that way, but I am going to try to see if I can give you enough information so in 2 years you'll keep the good people in and elect better people in the place of the people that you don't think are carrying their share of the load over the next 2 years. So we got to have a backup plan, and that's my backup plan. We always got to have a backup plan. Next thing I want to put up is the importance decision status board, and that'll be up every week, especially when changes are made or additions or when things get complete or get into the blue progress area. These are decisions more than organizational things. These are like we did, stop the proposed bond meeting, stop the proposed bond referendum, review the content of the proposed bond and proposal, restructure. These are things that we're committed to before the election. Resolve the Pearson ADA and OSHA infractions. I think that has to be done by July of next year, but I'm not positive. We'll let you know next week for sure on that. Resolve Recreation Director as soon as practical. Some of these things can't be done right away because it does take money from somewhere to be able to do these things. So that has to be looked at. The budget has to be looked at by the new selectmen. Resolve part-time fire marshal as soon as practical. Resolve part-time building inspector as soon as practical. These were commitments that were made. And a very, very important one, and we'll talk more about that tonight, if I can make it through here with my cold, is to transfer resolve the part-time building inspector, if I haven't said that, as soon as practical. And then the most important one is to transfer the school building maintenance responsibility, the school building maintenance and maintainers and everybody else, and the budget to the town of Winchester as soon as practical. Now, everybody seems to be in favor of this. I think there are some problems to be worked out with the representatives of the bargaining units and things like that have to be resolved, and I can't even guarantee that'll happen, but they're going to put their best efforts into trying to, and I'm not speaking for the whole Board of Selectmen here, this was committed to by the Republican Party, but to transfer the school building maintenance responsibility and all, that's very important, because once that's done, then what happened in the past 10 years, where the money was being given in the budget, supposedly, and the people weren't spending it on the maintenance, well, that won't happen in the future. That'll be the town's responsibility. So the budget you won't be able to switch the money from maintenance to other things like teachers' salaries or books or anything else. Well, that would be much more accountable. And the school people can then deal with what I call the education issues, not have to worry about the building maintenance and all that kind of stuff. So that's a big step forward, and the quicker that happens, the better. And I know we're going to see a blue mark there sooner or later. That's being worked on. Can't tell you when. Now I want to start a brief review of some of the past programs, especially and we have a lot more people watching now, and some of you that were watching might have maybe lost a little perspective during the last election month of razzmatazz, but so here we go, just a short review. This is why we set up this program pardon me, planning for success. Number one, to identify the problem, which I think we did quite rightly, that the problem is that we're breaking even over the last 10 years, and we don't seem to be getting ahead, and it's hard for us to finance things like the maintenance of the buildings and new buildings and things like that as we stand now. Proposed required solutions. Main proposal we made was to try to get the revenue up, and the Republican pre-election promises, campaign promises, they said they would put getting new revenue in as a top priority. So I'm waiting to see that put into effect by them. It isn't just the revenue, by the way, because as you saw from my last programs, we're not going to get a big jump in the revenue real quick. We're going to get a lot of work has to happen, and plans put into place, people motivated, et cetera, before we started. So it's going to take years to get the revenue up. It's not going to happen overnight. So if you can switch to this slide, I'd appreciate it here. Okay, thank you. And then I can blow my nose. Thanks. Got a heck of a cool. All right, the next is provide the organization for success. Thank you for doing that last week. Now I think we have in place what we need as selectmen and the majority to be able to do this, and I'm hoping that the minority selectmen also manage along with us, and that it's all done harmoniously. But if not, we need to get it done. The object of the exercise here is not to all be happy working together. It's all be happy working together, getting the right things done. So I hope it's all done in a business-like manner and that we proceed. So next is providing the environment for success, and we talked a bit about that. A few changes to the charter and things like that are necessary. We certainly need to have the charter changed or the implementation of a 5-year business plan for the town. We don't have one right now, and we need one. So that's critical, whether we change the charter to do it or we do it without changing the charter. My recommendation is change the charter, get that in there. And a lot of people are afraid if we change the charter, we'll also stop things from going to referendum. I don't think we should do that, but that's not my decision. The new selectmen can decide, and they can work out a plan for that. And then beginning, we're gonna finish Environment for Success today, and then we're going to introduce next week. We're going to talk about necessary disciplines and things, and other expediting the solution. Now, I want to say that this approach we took here for the total of the town. We also do it when we solve individual problems. For example, getting the grades up in the school, we should set some objectives for that. Getting the cost down per average student, or getting more students to get the cost down per average student, or whatever way we choose to do it. We should set some objectives for that over the years. And then we should put plans together. That's in my green papers. You can go see that in the town hall if you wish. Okay, now, we did talk about organizing for success, and I already mentioned some of that already. We talked about creating the environment for success part 1, which was to review the charter and to provide the 5-year business plan. Now we're going to talk about the new stuff, and that is creating an environment for success part 2, right? And creating for an environment for success part 2 mainly deals with 3 or 4 basic things that we need to achieve. The first is the Board of Education. I'd like to remind you that the school budget for the town is 63 or 4% of our budget. No business can run satisfactorily without concentrating on its biggest area of expense, which is the school system. 64% of our tax dollars go there. We get about $10 million, $8.5 million from the state to help. And if something should happen there and we don't get that money, then we got a bigger problem than we have right now. That won't be healthy. So I want to make a couple suggestions here for the new team. And one is that the chairman of the Board of Education should be occupied by a person with business experience. And the reason I say that is because we have a business problem there. Most of the problems are business problems, not education problems.
I'm not totally sure of the 3 job descriptions. I'm going to try to find out in the next week or two between the chairman of the Board of Education and the other 2 important positions there, superintendent of schools and the financial director. But I want to go over there in the next few weeks and talk to him and try to understand that. But I do basically think that the chairman of the board should be a person with business experience, because we have a business problem there. And we have plenty of people there who can help us with the education aspects. We can hire consultants for that. We got people on the Board of Education who are very good and have a lot of experience with that. But our main problem is a business problem. And we need to take that bull by the horns. It's our problem. It's not the state's problem. It's not the union's problem. It's our problem. So what we have to do is decide what sort of education do we want our children to have. How can we, it's got to be one, of course, that we can afford. And then we have to set some objectives for this education we want our people to have as a town. And then we have to go implement that. So we know in the past that we've had problems with the test scores. I've talked to Blaze about it, Blaze Salerno, superintendent of schools. I think he's making progress there, and I think he'll continue to make progress. But what I'd like to see are some objectives. What have the test scores been over the last 10 years on average? How much have they been improving? And what are our targets for the next 5 years? And these are measurable targets. They're things that we can measure. And they come from statistics and fact. And then from planning for the future. So we have to set some objectives, and then we have to put plans together as a town, and we have to finance those plans, and then we have to achieve those plans. And the second goes, as I mentioned earlier in the program, the second goal is a big question in the town has been the average cost per student. Now we do know, and I'm not an expert in this area, I'm just trying to, as a citizen that watches a lot of these things and keeps an eye on it and asks a lot of questions as an analyst, we seem to have a little bit of a problem in the area of average cost per unit for average cost per student, because areas like Heartland are not sending people to our schools anymore. And when they don't send people to our schools and they go elsewhere, then we have less kids in the school, therefore the average cost for training these students, unless the budget is managed wisely, will go up. Not necessarily go up, I mean, but if the budgets aren't managed, then I'm not saying they're not being managed wisely. Maybe we'll all come to the conclusion they are, and there's nothing we can do to improve them. I have my doubts there, because I think I know some issues myself that could probably be improved. But what we need to do is say, what do we as a town, what can we afford, and what are we willing to afford to be able to train children? I don't know if I mentioned this on previous shows. I think I did mention it way back. This is number 9 now, so I'm beginning to forget 1 and 2. But in my household, I always knew I wasn't going to be able to afford to go to Hotchkiss or one of the best prep schools. Matter of fact, when I got to the college, I knew I wasn't going to be able to go to the most expensive college in the country. I didn't have the grades to get a scholarship, which in those days you could do. I don't think you can even do that anymore for academic scholarship. But so I had to say, where can I afford to go? And I picked Kansas University because it was $50 a semester, including student fees, hospital costs, and everything. $50 a semester. Now in those days, $50 was a lot more than it is today. But that was something that I could afford to do, and that I could afford to work my way through. And as you know from today's program, that my granddad gave me a little help, my mom and dad gave me a little help. Eventually paid them back for that. But I had to make that decision. Now in those days, people thought you were nuts if you went to Kansas University or any other state universities. The Ivy League was the thing. But today, as you know, Doesn't make that much difference. All the schools are excellent. And to go to the school is that you can afford is very important. So we have to decide for our own town, what is it we can afford? And I'm not going to make that decision, you are. It's whatever you can afford. But you certainly can't have schools that you can't afford. So my approach to that is, let's get some more money in so we can afford them. And let's work at let's work at it. And let's get what we want and what we need, and let's solve the problem. But we need to set some objectives for that, because there is no flood of money coming in over the next few years. I think personally, because I'm a businessman, that the board of directors should be reduced in numbers, if possible. I think there's 9 people on that board. I talked to you earlier on shows about producing camels, and that my view is, business view is that committees, large committees, produce camels, and we don't want any camels. We don't live in the Mideast. So we really should have a smaller board that can make decisions and get on with it. Now, I don't think that's going to happen, to be honest with you, because people tell me that there's a state requirement that we have 9 people on the board, and if that's a state requirement, it's going to be very difficult to change it. So we're going to have to live with what we've got. And that way we need to get the business manager in to speed up that whole thing, get control of it, and work better with the selectmen and with the Gilbert School, and make this into a better situation. The next thing I put down, which I just touched on, was our relationship with the Gilbert School. As you know, we've had a lot of people in town who went to the Gilbert School. A lot of them went to a different Gilbert School because they probably went either before the Gilbert money ran out or in the earlier days. And I know when I was a kid in Torrington, we looked up to the Gilbert School. They had excellent discipline, they produced excellent people, and they were highly respected in the area. Not that Torrington High wasn't, it was too. But nobody looked down on the Gilbert School, and I don't think they do to this day. You produced a man here who ran for president of the United States 3 or 4 times. When I went to the selectmen meeting and the Board of Education with my green papers, and I even mentioned it in the green papers, the Gilbert School has produced a candidate for the president of the United States. When he came to town in his last campaign to talk at the library, 5 or 6 people showed up. If I were a civics teacher in town and he came to town, I'd make sure my whole civics class was there. And I would say, look, we might not agree with his views. Maybe he won't even make a good president. But this guy came from our school. He read half the books in the library. And he went off to very good schools. And he did a lot for the country in a very successful way. So you can learn from that as students. And maybe you can someday run for president. The other fine example that I have, and I don't know too many of the people who went through Gilbert School because I didn't, David Halberstam, one of the most famous authors in the world. Very positive person. Recently passed away, I'm sorry to hear. But he was in the same class as Ralph. So he was very, very good, and was a product of that Gilbert School. So I would like to see the relationship with the Gilbert School. The selectmen should continue to work with the Board of Education and Gilbert in an effort to understand each other's advantages and concerns and resolve any difficulties in a business-like manner for everyone's benefit. And I think that can happen. I think it's starting to happen already. There have been a lot of pressures. There have been a lot of bad press about it. We should stop that. We, as town members, should try to minimize the bad press about everything in this town. And we should all try, to the best of our ability, to maximize the good publicity about the good things in the town and how well it's going and how well we're working together and how well our products are, how good our products are. So the next thing I want to point out is pardon me, the fourth estate. For those who don't know what it is, the fourth estate is the newspapers and maybe other mass information technology today. But our public relations can be greatly improved. And in order to attract new business to town, whether they be companies or developments or whatever, we need to have good publicity. We need to be thought of as a very good place to live with an excellent school system. When I did talk to one of the past directors of the development committee, as I mentioned on the show previously, he told me the first question they ask is, what are the test scores? What's the quality of the schools? So we need to be able to produce positive information and disseminate it widely, and as an orchestra, send out the same message consistently to everybody. Whether they ask a person on the street or they have an article in the paper, the answer should always be the same, positive and good, and we should work together for that. So we need to improve our interface with the press. Maybe we can appoint someone to interface with the press, and, like a company would, and give a coherent, positive, and consistent, yet truthful impression of Winchester. You can't close out the press. We have free press in America. But they can give a positive, truthful impression of Winchester and Winston to the outside world. And we need to work at that, our public relations. The press should not be used as a weapon by one faction in the town against another. Because when you start throwing mud around, it lands on everybody. So to the extent it's being done now, it should be stopped. And in order to create an environment for success, we need to stop any of this, and we need to deal in a positive manner with the press. The next point I'd like to make is use of attorneys. I've been here now quite a few years watching the town in action. And I think we totally overuse attorneys. And I'm not talking just from a monetary viewpoint. But the town should assume more risk like a business would. Businesses assume a lot of risk. I have a lot of risk. If somebody goes on and you have a lot of risk. If somebody goes on our property and falls and breaks their leg, then, we're reliable. And you can't say the person shouldn't have been on the property and all kinds of things, because in the end, probably the insurance company will come in and say, we're going to pay them off. It's cheaper to do it that way. So we all have risk. We take out risk insurance if we're smart and can afford it. But we all have that sort of Damocles hanging over our head. The town is no different. The town should assume more risk. The use of attorneys should not be used as a delaying device or a weapon against others. We should not be overly concerned about the legal implications of every decision. Attorneys should be used to help us achieve our ends. We should find ways to legally get things accomplished, not to legally slow things down. Attorneys should be told, this is what we want to achieve. Please help us find a way to expeditiously achieve our goals. Now, I will tell a quick story here about the man who taught me about how to use attorneys when I was very young in business. And I was dealing with very big, complex computer systems for major companies throughout the world. Phil Fellows. And what Phil Fellows used to say to me, Brian, it's the manager's responsibility to create an environment for success where everybody can work efficiently and effectively. And he said, when you deal with customers, at the time I was with a manufacturer, when you deal with customers for these huge systems that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, in those days that was a lot of money, you should get in and be fair, and you should produce a contract that both sides will feel comfortable with, be able to live with, and be able to achieve their goals. And then you should take the contract and put it in the bottom drawer of your desk, forget about it. And you should get in with a customer and do everything you can within your power to make this venture a success. And then when it's over and it's successful, you can sit down and have a look at the contract and sort out any differences. But that's the kind of mentality that I was taught. So I think we need to do a little bit of more of that, right? Now, and by the way, that's how I ran things all over the world that way. So attorneys are essential. You need attorneys, and you need to be able to relate to them and use their expertise. But we, the town, are in control. We, the town, are the ones that are using these experts, and we, the town, are the people that have to take some risk and get on with the job. I have some very good examples of that from my own experience in town that I may relate in future programs, but now is not the time for that. The next point I want to make is relationships with labor unions. This may be a tricky area. I apologize if anybody feels uncomfortable talking about labor unions, but we do need to talk about labor unions because everywhere I've ever been, I've dealt with labor unions as a business, part of the business. I've dealt with socialistic labor unions in socialistic countries. I've been in countries where the country was the union. Russia, for example, behind the Iron Curtain. Budapest, Hungary, East Germany, all those places. The government was the union. Now, where town employees are represented by labor unions, it is important that both the town and the bargaining units realize the present state of affairs and continue to work together to harmoniously resolve differences for good of both the employees and the taxpayers. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have good relations now. I don't know. I'm just trying to say that to create an environment for success, we must have good relations. And my way of approaching it as a businessman, as I'm doing here on this program, is to make sure that everybody in town, whether they're in a union or not, especially the taxpayers and the employees, know the state we're in. Know that we haven't grown in the last 10 years. Know that we haven't been able to make ends meet over the last 10 years. Show them what we think we need to do to make them this town a success over the next 10 years. Include them in the planning for the next 10 years. Make sure that they're all involved in helping us plan for success. If we don't do that, we will not be a success. We will make it. Now, let me give you one difference. I'm very happy with American unions in a lot of respects, so I don't want anybody to misinterpret me. But I was sitting in England dealing with the unions before Maggie Thatcher, before when they were extremely socialistic. I was afraid to buy a house there at the time because I thought they might take it away from me, but so I didn't right away. I did eventually. But Maggie Thatcher came in and started to move things more towards capital, more of a capitalistic way. It's still not a way I would like to see it, but it's getting better. If something happened in a factory, or a factory wasn't doing well, or a business wasn't doing well, they would just keep getting more money from the government, more money from the state, and they would try to keep going, and nothing would happen, and it'd go on for years that way. And they got in real trouble. Finally, Maggie Thatcher deregulated a lot of companies, sold off a lot of the government-owned companies, coal, railroads, computer companies, and I was involved in some of that, and formed ICO, which I was an executive vice president of. And while all that was going on, I would look over my shoulder at America. And if, say, the Ford Motor Company or General Motors got in trouble, they would get together with the unions, and within 3 months, they would close a plant down. And they would then try, you know, to take care of all the employees, of course, that might lose their jobs, but then they would try to rebuild the company again so they wouldn't have to close another plant down. So they would really react in a more capitalistic manner than some of the countries I've seen and been in, and the way they handled their situation. And when I was going to Russia, I used to ask people, before Glasnost, what do you own that's Russian? And it'd be hard for them to answer. And in the end, of course, Russia went broke. So, and now they're thriving. So it's kind of interesting, isn't it? So let me say that the bargaining units are very important, and that they are very intelligent, and they will deal with us if we include them as part of the team, if they're not already. And we need to work together. They're very important, and we need to make sure that everybody realizes that. But in the end, it's our business, and we have to make some tough decisions from time to time. It is very important, though, that we keep our head, we stay cool, we deal business-like, and we make all our decisions in a business-like manner, with the best interests of all at heart. The next point I want to make here is that Robert's Rules of Order probably should go. It's in the charter that we need to work on Robert's Rules of Order. Now, time I've been in the town, I go to a lot of meetings, and I go to open meetings and referendums, and they're trying to use Robert's Rules of Order, and guess what? Nobody knows what Robert's Rules of Order are. I've seen people running the meeting who didn't understand Robert's Rules of Order. I personally don't totally understand Robert's Rules of Order because I've never been in a business in any country that used Robert's Rules of Order. Matter of fact, I've been worked with the government all over America, and I've never really seen them use Robert's Rules of Order. Now, people say to me, and I've dealt with a lot of states too, and I've never been in a meeting where we used Robert's Rules of Order. Now, when I mention this to people in the town, they say, well, you know, we have elected people, you know, people coming into open meetings, and how do you control those? Well, in business, you control them with a chairman. The chairperson is responsible for the decorum of the meeting and for how the meeting is controlled. You know, I've been to meetings in our town where policemen are in the audience, you know, because somebody calls and says, hey, we might have a disruption tonight. We'd like to have some policemen here. Now, disruption I've never seen happen yet, but maybe that's because the policemen were there. I don't know. But Robert's Rules of Order, if you're going to have it, then you should follow it. I don't think the select follow Robert's Rules of Order. I went through a whole year here where they were trying to understand Robert's Rules of Order. So somebody should make a decision on Robert's Rules of Order. I personally don't care. If you want to run by Robert's Rules of Order, that's okay. I think it slows things down. And why should we spend a lot of selectmen's time arguing about Robert's Rules of Order when the barn's burning down? Now, earlier in the programs, I did talk about bicycle shedding, and maybe I should review that again tonight. How much time do we have left, John? 8 minutes. Okay, I can talk about bicycle shedding. C. Northcote Parkinson, a famous Englishman, wrote a book about Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law is that things expand to fit the space available. If you have a garage and you build a new garage, and you want to put your car in there, the next thing you know, you're putting your bicycles in there, and your lawnmowers in there, and you're putting in there baby carriages and old pieces of wood, and next thing you know, you can't put your car in there. That's called things expand to fit the space available. That's a rule that everybody in the world knows, and they laugh when you talk about it. I have people in my neighborhood who can't put their cars in their garage because it's full of everything else. The next chapter in Mr. Parkinson's book was bicycle shedding. We sit in a boardroom and somebody comes in and says we want to have a $60 million bond package. And within the space of an hour and a half, the whole thing is explained it's voted on, it's agreed, we change our rules for what's going to be in the budget. As far as the capital, it's now the capital plan, and we do all that, and a couple papers are produced, and the next thing you know, that's out of the way. The next item on the agenda would be, wasn't here, but it would be, in Mr. Parkinson's view, let's put a new roof on the bicycle shed out in the backyard. It's chapter 2 in his book. And then that lasts for 8 hours, that discussion. Because everybody knows something about a bicycle shed. One person says, let's put a tar roof on the bicycle shed. They argue about that for 20 minutes. What kind of tar, where do we get it, how much does it cost, who's going to do it? And then somebody else says, let's put a glass roof on the bicycle shed. And they argue about that for half an hour. And then somebody else says, let's not have a roof at all on the bicycle shed, and they argue about that for half an hour. And then somebody else says, let's tear down the bicycle shed and build a whole new bicycle shed. And then somebody else says, let's build it 2 stories high, and they argue about that for half an hour. And this goes on for about 8 hours. To make a point here, this is called bicycle shedding. And in many companies I've been in, as soon as somebody starts saying bicycle shed, then everybody knows that the meeting has gotten out of control. Now, one of the bicycle shedding issues we have is Robert's Rules of Order. Surprise, surprise. We talk about that a lot in meetings, and it goes on and on and on. Another one is the cars for the policemen. You know, should they or should they not be use them on their personal things when they really have to and when they don't have to? And that goes on for an hour. And I'm not taking a position on any of that. I think it's all resolved now. But if you look at the meetings yourself, I think you'll see less now with the businessmen in because they tend not to bicycle shed. But when you have bicycle shedding, that's going on for a lot of time, talking about a small issue that doesn't mean beans, right? So I think we should probably take a good look at this. And now, with that, I think until they stop me, I'm just going to tell a couple of stories of my granddad, the Sicilian granddad. I made a mistake on my recording. I was so emotional, I cried halfway through there, but I called him an Italian. He's really a Sicilian. He was a Sicilian. I'll just tell you a couple stories. He used to say to my mother, once I got out of school and I started working, he used to say, Brian's a bum. And my mother would say, why is he a bum? And he would say, he's a bum because he keeps moving all the time. Every time he sends me a postcard or a letter, he's in a different place. He doesn't seem to be able to keep a job. Now, my granddad, he was in the barber shop all his life, walking around that chair, and he loved it, and he was an expert. He was a top-notch barber. And he just couldn't understand why Brian traveled so much and went. Now, of course, most of the time I was changing locations within the same company, getting promotions and taking on big assignments around the world and taking on trouble situations. And he was never quite understood why I was that way. The other story I like to tell about my granddad is when we were little kids, my brother and I were a year and a half apart. We lived about a mile away from the barber shop. And we had to have a free haircut every 2 weeks. And he would say to me, Brian, you needed a haircut. And I say, why? He says, it's been 2 weeks since you came down for the last haircut. Saturday, you come down for a haircut. We hated to go on Saturday. That was our day off. That's when we played football and baseball in the yard with the kids. So we trudged down to the barber shop. We'd go into the barber shop and say I had my haircut first at 8:30 in the morning on Saturday, his busiest day. And by the way, our haircuts were free. I'd get my haircut, and then we'd be waiting for my brother to get his haircut so we could go and walk home together. And we'd be in fear of the little bell on the door ringing, meaning somebody, paying customer, was coming in. So we'd sit there in fear, and sure enough, a little bell rang, and in came another paying customer. The paying customer went ahead of my brother, or me, depending on who got the haircut first. Sometimes we'd be there 5 hours waiting for paying customers to subside before we could get our final haircut and walk home. That's a story I like to tell. I've told it all over the world. I always tell these stories. That's customer satisfaction for you. Thank you. See you next Tuesday at 9 o'clock.